Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Ripley episode 4. It's called La Dolce Vita. So spoilers for the episode. As always, this is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you to Fletcher for picking this show. We had the big murder episode last time. This is where Ripley tries to just take the life of Dickie. This episode's a bit of a hodgepodge of different elements. First half being going back to the town that Dickie was in and kind of just emptying his house, offering to sell stuff to the local hotel, making a deal with the mafia guy to try and sell Dickie's boat. But of course, more importantly, dealing with the people in Dickie's life, giving severance pay and telling the housemaid that she's no longer required, but mainly Marge, and trying to because at first I thought he's just going to like pack his things and say, yeah, Tom, Dickie had a speak with me. He said that he wanted me to leave and move on and see the rest of the country, and and just basically playing dumb and saying that he doesn't know where he is. Of course, that's not what he does. He says that Dickie has decided to stay in Rome and basically passes along a lot of made-up information from Dickie to Marge, which Marge is clearly skeptical about. Although, two things really stuck out to me in all these conversations that they have here. There's like two scenes, like one in the little art studio and then one kind of in the office area. The two things that stuck out to me was emphasis on the fridge, right? Not only does he take ice out of the fridge that Dickie and Marge bought together, and that was like a big sticking point for Ripley. I don't even know how much I talked about it in that episode, but Ripley was kind of trying to get in the way of it because, buying a fridge together is like really settling down, and you're not going to be moving around anymore. That's like planting your feet. So he was very much kind of trying to talk them out of that back when that was first brought up. And there's a great moment at the end of this little thing where he says, oh, and Dickie said, you can take the fridge. And it's just a nice little capper because of how he spoke about that fridge back in that episode. But also as a final little FU of saying, yeah, your relationship's over. If the fridge represented, like, spending the rest of your lives together, as if a fridge represents marriage, it doesn't really, but in the context of how it's came up in this show, that's how Ripley viewed it. And by him saying, no, you can take the fridge. Like in the same way that you say, oh, you can take the dog, or you can take the whatever when people break up. Obviously, he's vague about a lot of things, but he does go out of his way to say a bunch of stuff. The other capper on it, though, which I think Marge isn't really believing a lot of what he's saying. She's very skeptical. But he does add in on, hey, we picked up the perfume you like. And this is obviously the perfume she does like, because Dickie went and got it, and he spent all day trying to find it. That was something they spent time on last episode, and it's kind of like this thing that she can't deny is accurate. It's like, oh, hey, that is the perfume I like. Dickie would know that. That gives some kind of like credence to what Tom's saying a little bit by proxy. So while it doesn't prove everything else he said by any means, it at least proves that there's some truth mixed in here somewhere, and she has to kind of begrudgingly accept some stuff for now. But she clearly doesn't believe a lot of what he's saying, especially since some of it's like, oh, Dickie said you have to spend some time apart. He wants to be on his own for a while in Rome. He doesn't know where he's staying yet. Again, a lot of vague little things, but it really feels like he's clearing everything out. He claims that he's taking stuff to Dickie, all of his art supplies, which he just kind of dumps at the train station onto a random cart without giving a shit. One of my favourite little details, though, when he's trying to sell stuff, and he brings the manager of the local hotel over for him to like pick things to buy for the hotel, the manager goes up to the painting on the wall and says, oh, is this for sale too? Whatever it is. And this is the manager playing dumb, and he's being a little shit here because he's clearly trying to imply that this is just something random that's not worth a whole lot. He's trying to get a bargain, and Ripley picks up on it straight away. He's like, no, whatever it is, no, that's not for sale. And he makes a point of building a little container for it and taking it with him. Although I don't know if he still has it by the end, because he didn't have it when he went into the hotel in Rome, so I don't know what he did with it after he travelled, but I'm sure it'll come back up later. Maybe just put it in storage somewhere. all of this was kind of cleaning up the loose ends of the life that Dickie had before, right? It's going back and making sure that his housemaid's not expecting him back. It's making sure that Marge isn't expecting him, at least for a while, although clearly she's going to be persistent. And because he's going to be using Dickie's name to travel, it means that Marge could come looking for him and find that it's just Ripley instead of Dickie. And that's a threat that's brought up throughout the rest of this episode. And it's kind of really well done in the sense that Ripley, when he goes to this big fancy hotel in Rome, when he goes there, he saunters in, he's very happy, he's been practicing Dickie's signature on the train ride there, and the concierge accepts his passport. He accepts this is who he says he is, and he's like, hey, give me a room, deluxe, for 2 weeks. And there's a moment when Ripley goes into this hotel room and it's very luxurious, big bed, very fancy, and he just kind of like, it's not a giggle, but it's like a little sort of laugh through like a heavy breath of him just being ecstatic that he's pulled this off, that he's living now the life of luxury because of what he's done, that the plan has come together. But almost immediately, right, he sets up some stuff in the rooms and he goes back downstairs to hand his key in before he goes out. And immediately the concierge is, hey, you got a message. And he's like, what? I got a message? And it's from Marge. It's he's got like a sort of message note from her. And he has to ask questions like, hey, was she here? Did you speak to her on the phone? He's like, yeah, she was on the phone, blah, blah, blah. And it's very clear that he's not away with this yet, that Marge isn't just going to let Dickie go. Clearly, Marge and Dickie were in a serious relationship. It was progressing. She's not just going to give up overnight and accept that Dickie's run away from her, if that's the story that Tom's kind of peddling here. So immediately he checks out. And I love this little segment of the episode because he gets a taste of what he's been striving for, of living this life of the 1%, as it were. And then immediately there's a big, big red flag saying, no, you're not safe to enjoy this yet. You can still get cut out. There's still someone who might come looking, who might catch you out and unravel the entire web of lies. And he has to like make the choice to leave the luxurious life and get in a cab and go to a smaller, dingier hotel. He asks for a standard room. He specifically says that word to not raise any kind of like, any alarms. No one should notice that he's here because it's in a crappier part of the city. The concierge in this hotel is like asleep on the counter when he walks in. It's all a contrast to the other hotel where he was having the life he wanted, and now he has to be here amongst the lowlives like he's always been. Because, and I'm using that term just in the context of how he's seeing the world around him. But he has to retreat to that, and that's like a big part of this episode, and it's kind of a concern going forward, and all the rest of it. There's some great moments at the start of the episode when he first gets off the train back in the town he started. I can't remember the town that Dickie lived in. I apologize, but he has a moment where he's walking past, like there's like 3 police officers in the train station, and he's like a little bit nervous, and he's going past them. And it's nothing. Like, he walks past and he has a little smirk after he walks past and realizes they're not there for him. But he's concerned that they might be. And there is definitely an element of maybe guilt in his head throughout the episode. He has these little nightmare moments where he's thinking about the water. He's thinking about Dickie floating in that water. It kind of comes to a head at one point where, literally, actually, that I'm saying that, where he goes to see some of those Caravaggio paintings, and there's a couple of scenes in this episode where he goes to see them. There's one where it's in the more sort of, I don't know, it's like a chapel or a big monastery or something like that. But he's looking at these. He puts the little coin in to turn the lights on the paintings, and the priest says, "Hey, like this always the light," or whatever, and the light turns off right after, which is a very kind of little somber moment for him. But the one that I really want to point out is when he goes to another art gallery, and there's like a tour guide giving like some background on the paintings, and I think the tour guide mentioned that Caravaggio murdered someone at one point. I think I heard that right, which ends up making it a perfect thematic sort of connection to our main character and what he's up to. But this painting specifically portrays a killer, David, I think they said, holding up the head of another someone that he's beheaded, and it's a really good little moment of him of Ripley looking up at this painting, because this painting portrays the killer as sympathetic almost, where he's looking longingly at the person he's just killed. I think they might have even said it was a demon technically, but you know, they look at a guy's head. And it's this idea that he was, you know, possibly even in love with the person that he killed. And it just, you know, it felt like it was just kind of like everything was relating to Ripley and Dickie, and this idea that Ripley might have felt something for him. At the very least, he was infatuated with him in other ways, even if it wasn't romantic, although I suspect there maybe was some of that. And I think one of the other elements that's running through this episode, I mean, it's been kind of been running through several of the episodes actually, but it was really coming to the forefront in my mind with this episode. And that was the idea that the Ripley himself is very insecure, because he could just, like, he could be very cold and calculated. He could very much not care about the identity he's leaving behind. But there's multiple examples in this episode where he intentionally talks himself up to other people when he's pretending to be Dickie. Specifically when he's writing letters back to Dickie's parents or to Marge to say, hey, I'm in Rome and we need some time apart, and he's sort of like backing up the lies that he told when he saw her in person as Ripley. Now he's saying, corroborating things as Dickie, and we get some of Margie's responses in another letter as well. And she sends him a scarf that she made that Ripley just throws randomly in the street somewhere. But he specifically goes out of his way to point, well, one, he takes credit for helping with the perfume when he sees her, and then when he writes the letter to Marge as Dickie, he says, oh, it was really hard to find that perfume. I searched all day. I almost gave up. And that part is actually true. We saw Dickie spend most of the day looking for the perfume. That's more or less accurate. But then he says, I was just about to give up when Tom found it. He gives himself the credit for finding the perfume, which we know is not true, but he's going out of his way to say, hey, Neil, Ripley's great. Ripley's a great guy. And then later with the parents' letter, when he's saying, hey, mum and dad, I'm in Rome and, you know, I'm sorting out some stuff, he goes on this big spiel about how, you know, you were wrong about Ripley. He's actually a great guy. He's a terrific human being, and he's made me realize the value of family because he's an orphan. And when he talks about that, I realize how much I love my parents, and I will be coming back, but I need to sort out some stuff in my life first. And he's sort of, you know, try to prolong how long he can get away with this. But he keeps going out of his way to praise Ripley himself. And it's kind of interesting because it kind of spells this idea that he is very insecure about himself. And while he's constantly lying, he's constantly conning people and pretending to be things that he's not, he's also on some level hurt by the fact that people don't like him and trust him, even though he's kind of doing that to himself by the way he is. But it really does set up this insecurity that he has, that in some level he keeps stealing identities in some way or another. In this case, wholesale, he's pretending to be this man. He's using his bank accounts. He's traveling with his name. We see him make the new passport, gluing his photo into Dickie's. The whole thing is him trying to be someone else, but on some level it's because he's ashamed of who he is, whether or not he realizes that or not. That's the way him talking himself up and trying to convince people, no, Ripley's a great guy. You're wrong about him. He's great. It really tells me how he feels about himself, whether or not he's conscious of it or not. The way that he's latching onto these new personalities, it's almost like he's refusing to admit how much he doesn't like himself. So he's trying to constantly project how much he wants to be liked onto others. Yeah, I think there's a good bit of like character development with that stuff, and it's kind of been there to some extent throughout all the episodes with how he's been and how he talks about himself and how he doesn't like when people are suspicious of him. And you can obviously read that in one way of him just being nervous that they're going to catch him out and what he's up to, but I think there is kind of a two-layered thing to it. And here, like him almost like quite pathetically just saying how much of a great guy he is to other people while he's pretending to be someone else is probably arguably the most pathetic thing he's done in the show. He's done a lot. It's not the worst thing he's done in terms of how bad it is, but in terms of being pathetic, it might be the most pathetic. So I thought that was good stuff. I also loved the callbacks to earlier episodes When he arrives in the train station at the start of the episode, the cab driver tries to like offer him a ride when he comes out, and he just tells him to get lost because obviously the cab ride didn't go so well back in episode 1. And then the other one that I really liked was when he goes to the bank finally. You know, he's made some money selling a bunch of Dickie's stuff, but he needs to actually start accessing Dickie's bank accounts. And he goes into the bank. He says, "Hey, you know," and the guy's like, "Oh, you're from the Naples branch. You know, we're in Rome, blah blah blah." And he has to take the account over to the manager of the bank, and the bank manager's looking over at him, and he picks up the phone, and it very much closely mirrors what happened in episode 1 when Ripley got very nervous and he left the bank. He couldn't risk the idea that they were figuring out that he was up to something, that he wasn't who he said he was, and he had to skedaddle. Here, he stood his ground, he waited, he had to be confident, and sure enough, it all worked out, right? You know, the guy came back and he counted out the money, and it all checked out. As far as, I mean, obviously they've made a mistake here, but, you know, like, it means he's deceived them enough that it's worked. So I like that callback to that, where this time he has to just kind of stick to his guns and hope that this is working, and just assume that this is all procedure, this is all normal, there's nothing about this that's raising alarm bells in his head. But it works, he gets away with it. And there's a lot of talk about, you know, Dickie not being back with Marge at Christmas, and by the end of the episode, it's Christmas time, and he's walking past the Christmas tree in Rome. There's a lot of great visuals with this stuff towards the end of the episode. It really gives it a bit of mood. But yeah, it kind of wraps up with one of the letters that he's writing, I think, to the parents. So a lot of great visuals to wrap the episode up. Obviously, Marge is still a concern. One of my favorite scenes of the episode is that when he realizes that Marge might still come, she even says she might visit in her letter when she responds to him. He goes to the concierge of his hotel, right? And I think this is another difference in why he belongs at this hotel rather than the big fancy one. He couldn't ask the big fancy hotel guy to do this. But this concierge at the sort of, you know, it doesn't look a bad hotel, but, you know, it's a much smaller, cheaper hotel. He comes up and explains, "Hey, I broke up with my fiance and I'm kind of hiding from her because I met someone else. So she's kind of searching all the hotels, right? And she must be searching, you know, she obviously contacted the big fancy hotel because it was the most obvious place that Dickie would go and stay at, which is what was basically scared Ripley away from it. But he goes to this guy and says, "Hey, if this woman comes in," and he shows him a photograph of Marge, "if she comes in, can you tell her I'm not here? Can you say you've never seen me?" And, you know, the guy looks down at his logbook and goes, "Nope, sorry, miss, there's no Mr. Greenleaf here." And he's like, "Ah, bravo." And so, like, this guy's agreed to do this. And it's not that this is a sketchy guy or a bad guy, but it does feel like being at this type of hotel, he was more likely to get someone who would be like, "Yeah, I'll do that for you. Like, I'll bend a little rule here and not admit that you're here." Not that she's like an official of some kind that you have to tell her, like, if someone's here. If anything, if a stranger came in off the street and said, "Hey, do you have this guest here?" I don't know how I feel about hotel staff just always giving that information out. I mean, this could be a stalker for all you know. I love also the way that Ripley keeps, like, and the same way that he's always trying to, like, he tries to emphasize certain things. He also is trying to de-emphasize certain things. Like when he brings up, "Oh, going to spend Christmas with Freddy," he says, "Oh, what's his name, Freddy?" Like, he intentionally makes it sound like he doesn't remember something. He tries to, like, play the part and play the role that he's building for himself. So yeah, no, it's a very fun episode. It's not as spectacular as last episode. And I don't think it could have been. I don't think it could have been as special as last episode, because last episode is the high point of the show so far, and it was a big prominent turning point in the story. And this show is absolutely at its best when it lets Ripley do stuff with very little dialogue. I also kind of like as well that the mafia guy kind of keeps trying to swindle him to get more of a commission for helping him sell this boat. And he sort of comes up with this story about how there's the boatman wants a commission as well. And Ripley just kind of sees it for what it is and says, "Oh, hey, you've came up with this story to get the 20% that you wanted instead of 10%. Nice try, but it's not happening." And the mafia guy immediately says, "You know, you're also telling a story. You want me to send a check in your name? That's a bit dodgy. You're telling a story too." And he does. He goes and opens a new bank account somewhere else with this check for the boat. And I do wonder if part of his plan is to try and transfer as much of Ripley or much of Dickie's money as possible, before the jig is up. Because this won't last forever. It potentially can if the parents ever come looking. Marge is a more immediate threat, but in theory, she might eventually accept that Dickie's just abandoned her and just move on with her life. That's possible. Obviously, I'm not expecting that to happen because it's only 8 episodes and we're only 4 in. But I'm saying in theory, if this situation really happened, the girlfriend could potentially move on if she accepts that she's been dumped in some fashion. Even though it's not true in this case, she might think that and move on. The parents would probably always be looking, and that means that eventually it may have to be over. But in the meantime, he's probably going to try and transfer as much, and probably not actually do bank transfers, because then it'd be obvious who was transferring to who. I imagine taking the money out and just slowly then putting it back into the other account. So as far as the bank's concerned, it's only ever been Dickie Greenleaf that's been in there, and the other bank account's only ever seen Tom Ripley. Right? Until people actually have photographs of this guy and can compare them, no one will know. Because, we're in a time period, all it takes for him to write a convincing letter, and I'm sure maybe Marge will pick up on some inaccuracies or things that don't sound like Dickie, but all he needs is like Dickie's typewriter, which he intentionally takes with him, right? So it's that letterhead, so it's the same type of font and the same type of whatever else you get in a typewriter. I don't know, I've never used a typewriter. I'm just familiar that they each have a distinct kind of, style to them when they type. In fact, the recent episode of Columbo I watched, the typewriter being used to write a suicide note was a big plot point, and that came up quite a bit. Luckily, I'm too young for actually having knowledge on this thing, so I'm okay with that. But yeah, that's my thoughts on La Dolce Vita, episode 4 of Ripley. I will be back in a couple of weeks with the next chapter, but let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, much like the sponsor of this episode, you can support everything over on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the content coming and ensure that I can keep doing this as often as I do. So thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?